Days Gone 2 will never happen. At least, that's what I believed a few months ago, but with the announcement of the remaster, I'm starting to see a tiny glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. Days Gone was released in 2019, almost 6 years ago, and it was Sony's attempt to expand into an open-world zombie apocalypse game, but ever since its launch, the game struggled. High expectations, an amazing trailer, and not so stellar delivery. Critics gave it a score that wasn't terrible, but it was underwhelming by Sony standards. The fan reception, however, was much warmer, with a far more positive outlook on the game, and this divided reaction left Sony confused, especially during a time when they were releasing titles like God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, Uncharted 4, Spider-Man, and some others, games that were praised by both critics and fans. Days Gone only had the fans on its side, but over time it became clear that this fanbase wasn't going to stay quiet. To this day, they still beg for a sequel, and they're only getting louder, and I'm one of them. In my opinion, Days Gone was fantastic. The bike mechanics were incredible, and the hordes, oh man, the hordes. Some of the most intense moments in any zombie game. Days Gone brought a breath of fresh air to the genre. Yet, despite all the praise from the community, a sequel still feels out of reach, and maybe it'll never happen. Or will it? The light at the end of the tunnel is the remaster that was announced during the last State of Play. My first reaction, and probably the reaction of millions of Days Gone fans, was the typical one. Why is this game, which is already beautiful and graphically impressive to this day, getting a remaster? That's stupid. To some extent, I agree, but I see this remaster as Sony testing the waters for a potential sequel. As you know, Days Gone didn't have the best launch, not just because of the critics' reception, but also due to some bugs, texture issues, and performance problems. These were the usual glitches that don't break the game but aren't exactly pleasant to encounter. When I played, the worst I experienced was some poorly rendered textures. Nothing major. This remaster is a chance for Sony to see if the public is still interested in this universe. A smooth, problem-free release is what this game deserves. If the remaster sells well and gets praised, it will show Sony that the sequel needs to happen. The biggest problem though, as of right now, is the price. It's a bit outrageous. It literally costs the same as Split Fiction, which is shaping up to be one of the best games of the year. For those who already own the game, the remaster is just a $10 upgrade. But if you have it through PlayStation Plus, you'll have to pay full price, which is the $50. It almost feels like they don't want the game to sell. The same thing happened with The Last of Us Part 2 Remaster, which by the way was very well received, but it came with a massive new mode that was incredible and mixed that with the incredible gameplay that The Last of Us Part 2 has, which unfortunately Days Gone doesn't have. That said, the Days Gone Remaster will still bring new content, a permadeath mode where you restart the game if you die, a speedrun mode focused on finishing the game as quickly as possible, and something called Horde Assault, which sounds like a new mode where you just fight against hordes. Are these additions as interesting as the Lost Levels and the No Return mode from The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered? No, not even close. But I still want to dive into the remaster. Seeing the trailer with that iconic soundtrack gave me a warm feeling. Graphically, it looks about the same, but I enjoyed watching the trailer. It gave me hope for a possible sequel. And the best part, the comments under the remaster's announcement are filled with people begging for a sequel. It's still beautiful to see so many fans still wanting this game to live on. But most importantly, the moment the Days Gone Remaster was announced, it shot to the top of the PlayStation Store pre-order charts, which is huge. Was the remaster necessary from a graphical perspective? No, it doesn't even look as impressive or different from the original as, say, the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster, but this feels like a stepping stone towards something much bigger, which would obviously be Days Gone 2. We have very little information about what a sequel could actually be. One of the few confirmations we got from one of the game's directors was that Days Gone 2 would dive much deeper into the relationship between Deacon and Sarah, exploring the dynamics between them after years of thinking each other was dead. Sure, they end up together and seemingly happy, but are they really happy? Is there any lingering conflict between them? Does Deacon still hold any resentment towards Sarah for not trying to find him? Or did she try to find him? We don't know. The story would continue with a strong, heavy narrative, perhaps even stronger than the first game, but this time around with a much bigger focus on Nero. To me, Nero is one of the most fascinating aspects of Days Gone, this shadowy government force that knows everything but keeps those secrets hidden to avoid alarming the few survivors left. The virus is evolving, as we saw in the game's true ending. The Freakers are changing, becoming smarter, stronger, faster, at a terrifying pace. too fast for anyone's safety. This concept is incredible to me, at least from a narrative perspective. When it comes to gameplay, however, there's plenty of room for improvement in a sequel. The bike, honestly, it's already practically perfect, but the melee combat needs a serious overhaul. I like the whole mechanic of scavenging scrap to repair your weapons, that's cool, but it needs more depth. The combat itself should be more fluid. Just look at The Last of Us for comparison. The open world is another area that in my opinion needs an almost complete overhaul. Visually, it's stunning. Honestly, this game made me want to visit Oregon in real life. For those of you who don't know, the game's world is based on the state of Oregon. It's filled with beautiful forests, mountains, the snow, it's all so stunning. But the secondary activities, that's where Days Gone falls short. A lot. It has all the typical open world tasks, enemy camps, fetch quests, and other repetitive activities. These aren't inherently bad, but when they're overdone and surrounded by weak side content, they become stale. Just look at The Witcher 3. I know that this may be far-fetched, but The Witcher 3 has plenty of enemy camps. But no one complains because the side quests are so well written and engaging that you barely notice the repetitive stuff. I would love to see more complex, layered side quests in Days Gone 2, because honestly, the ones we have now are pretty basic and so weak. I also think it would be interesting to customize our own camp, kind of like what they're doing with Assassin's Creed Shadows, but I'll save my full wishlist for a separate video, okay? The important thing here is that Days Gone has a solid foundation, but there's a lot that could be improved. Which brings me to this question: why did the first game fail in Sony's eyes? Beyond the critics' reviews, which weren't that great across most major outlets, when you combine PlayStation and Steam sales, Days Gone sold more than 9 million copies. And by now, it's likely sold even more. That's more than titles like Bloodborne, Ratchet & Clank, God of War 3, and Death Stranding. It's also on par with heavy hitters like Uncharted 3, Detroit Become Human, and nearly Ghost of Tsushima. And keep in mind, this is coming from a game that had worse reviews, a rocky launch, more bugs, and just about everything working against it. So clearly, copies sold isn't the real issue. Days Gone performed this well despite all the early struggles. Just imagine how successful a sequel could be, especially one that improves on the weaker aspects I mentioned earlier. Another factor working against Days Gone, whether we like to admit it or not, was a bit of politics. One of the most infamous critiques that went viral during its launch was from a reviewer who literally rolled their eyes at the fact that the protagonist was a white male. Yes, that's an actual criticism from a game reviewer. And also there was some controversy surrounding one of the game's directors. He made a pretty bold and frankly kind of stupid statement, claiming that if gamers really loved the game, they should have bought it at full price on release day. Comments like that didn't exactly help the game's image. A mix of those controversies, critical reception, and some internal decisions led Sony to try and distance themselves from Days Gone over the years. But now, with the remaster, it seems like they've finally decided to give this incredible game a second chance. But beyond the remaster, it also looks like Sony is working on a Days Gone movie. It appears they already have a writer, a director, and are searching for an actor to play Deacon. Excuse me, but this is Deacon in the game. This is Sam Witwer, the actor who portrayed him. He absolutely nailed the role. He's a fantastic actor. It would be a stupid decision not to cast the literal perfect choice who's right in front of them. But a Days Gone movie, well, we're talking about a game that takes 30 to 40 hours to complete, crammed into a 2-hour film. Personally, I'd much prefer a TV show, just like what they did with The Last of Us. Even though I have my issues with that adaptation, a TV show would give Days Gone an expansive world and emotional story the time it deserves. But let's be real, there's been no news about this movie for years, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's quietly cancelled. And with Sony's recent wave of cancellations, that wouldn't be shocking at all. However, if the movie actually gets released and somehow becomes a success, and if the remaster also performs well, that could be the final push Sony needs to realize that a sequel should have happened a long time ago. That said, I'm not holding my breath for the movie to be a hit. After what happened with the Uncharted movie, my expectations are pretty low. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people that hated Tom Holland. I like Tom Holland's portrayal of Nathan Drake, and the movie itself wasn't terrible, but in the grand scheme of things, it just didn't feel like Uncharted. And if that's how they handled one of their biggest franchises, I'm not exactly hopeful for a Days Gone movie. But what about you? Do you think Days Gone deserves a sequel? You probably already know my opinion by now. Without a doubt, I'll be making a video about the remaster, something like revisiting Days Gone, especially since I haven't played it it in a few years, and honestly, I kinda miss it. I just wish the remaster would change a bit more than what we saw in the trailer, like how the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster brought noticeable improvements. The original game was already stunning, and if we ever get a sequel, there are definitely things to improve. For me, one of the biggest issues is the story pacing, and that's something they really need to refine. Still, despite its flaws, I absolutely adore this game. And hey, don't forget to subscribe. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subs, and every bit of support means the world. And thank you so much for watching.